Hello and welcome back to Bite Size Boxing. So we have Shakur Stevenson versus William Zepeda as part of this big bill going on the weekend in New York. What do we think of the fight? So I'm going to start off by talking about William Zepeda to begin with. William Zepeda, of course, a fighter who's been on all of our radars for quite a number of years now. A fighter who, up until recently, has looked invincible, but he's stepped up recently against Tevin Farmer, and he's had two fights against Tevin Farmer. Now, Tevin Farmer was supposed to be essentially brought in as an opponent, as a bit of a has-been. Tevin Farmer, of course, was sort of, I would say hyped, but that might be the wrong word. I think he was one of the first, was he a DAZN acquisition, if I remember rightly, when Eddie Hearn first launched into the market back in 2018? Sort of 2017, 2018, there or thereabouts. So we're going back nearly 10 years ago now. And Tevin Farmer was essentially the carrot that was being dangled in front of Gervonta Davis at the time to get him to fight him. So Tevin Farmer since then has racked up a whole bunch of losses, admittedly in some quite valiant efforts, but he was being very much brought in as the opponent for Zepeda. Now, Zepeda in the first fight got dropped and I believe left with a split decision. It was a fight that I thought he legitimately won, but it was no doubt a tight fight, and he looked human in there for the first time. So I think one thing that a lot of people are getting twisted going into this is that they remember Tevin Farmer in 2017 being a relatively negative back foot boxer who was a slickster, who doesn't really punch very hard. And then they look at Shakur Stevenson and they go, well, this guy struggled with this guy, therefore it's a one-on-one fit. What I would bring people's attention to is that Tevin Farmer's style has actually changed quite dramatically since 2017, 2018. He's worked on turning his knuckles over a lot better into the punches. If you look, his punch technique has increased quite substantially. And although he still has that somewhat back foot boxer style, he's learnt to catch and shoot now. So rather than constantly be going backwards, he's actually able to stand his ground and catch and shoot on the counter and actually push off of his front foot, which means when he's delivering punches, he's actually able to punch a lot harder, which isn't necessarily something Stevenson does. So I just wanted to preface that because I feel that is an unfair comparison that a lot of people are making. But that being said, Zepeda did struggle in both of those fights. Of course, he had the rematch, I think it was earlier this year. And again, he won a majority decision this time, but I would say it was more sort of comfortable this time. That being said, in the 12th, he did appear to get buzzed and he did appear to struggle slightly to see the fight out. So both fights were very valiant efforts by Farmer, but Zepeda did manage to eke it out both times. So William Zepeda's style, high energy, eyebrow-raisingly high output. It must be said, I'm not the first person to say that. A lot of people have very, very high output. Make of that what you will, but an incredibly high output fighter. He has got a high knockout ratio, but I think to me it's similar to the Subriel Matias effect. A lot of people look at Subriel Matias and they say, oh, he's like a destructive puncher, and I don't think he is. He just wears you down with crazy volume, which is exactly what William Zepeda does. William Zepeda throws a million punches around, and that tells. And one thing William Zepeda does do is he goes to the body brilliantly. William Zepeda is a fantastic body puncher. So what he can do, he can change the levels, body to head, focus on that body, and he just breaks you down over rounds and rounds, and he stops you sometimes early, sometimes mid, sometimes late. Ask Maxi Hughes. It's one of them ones where, because of his just crazy output, and he has got decent punching power, don't get it twisted, he can break you down relatively quickly. So, Shakur Stevenson, clearly a very, very talented boxer, Olympic silver medalist, don't ask him about the gold. But let's start off. I am not a Shakur Stevenson fan. I'm going to be very honest and very upfront with you, in the same way that I'm not a particularly big Devin Haney fan. I am not a massive fan of relatively negative back foot boxers who, basically spend their time trying not to get hit. That is not entertaining to me. Particularly as someone who's based in the UK, the idea of staying up till 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning to watch that, I'd rather not. That being said, I am familiar with Shakur Stevenson. I have watched him, of course. I have subjected myself to things like the De La Santas fight and, of course, the Conceição fights and things like that. So I am familiar with him. I've obviously seen the Jamel Herring fights and that kind of thing. So I do know Shakur Stevenson. I know what Shakur Stevenson is about. Now, as much as I don't appreciate his style, as much as I find him absolutely dull as dishwater to watch, and I frankly really don't enjoy watching Shakur Stevenson one bit, it would be remiss of me to say that he's not talented. He is a very talented fighter. He is a very, very good boxer. In terms of his footwork is exemplary. His hand speed is impressive when he does put his shots together. He is a talented boxer. I'm not going to sit here and just trash the guy like some people do. He is clearly a world level, if not elite talent, if nothing else. So Shakur Stevenson is a very, very, very good boxer. We know this. Now, what we haven't necessarily seen is what happens when a guy like Zepeda comes towards him and applies pressure and sticks it on him. Now, although we haven't really seen that in the pro ranks, I've got to be honest, given how experienced Shakur is in the amateurs, he would have seen Zepeda's before. This isn't going to be a shock to him. And I haven't seen anything up until this point to lead me to suspect that Shakur is carrying really bad glass under there or anything like that. So it's one of them ones where, kind of going into the fight, as much as I'm not a Shakur Stevenson fan, as much as I don't appreciate his style, I believe, if I'm being honest, especially considering what we've seen recently from Zepeda, I think Stevenson will beat Zepeda. I think Stevenson will have enough to outbox Zepeda. I think that foot speed that Shakur Stevenson has will cause Zepeda problems. I'm not saying that Zepeda is slow with his feet, because he's not. He is relatively quick. And of course he has got brilliant output. But I do believe Stevenson will have enough to just be able to box in and out of that pocket. It might mean, though, at least, we are going to see Stevenson forced into being somewhat entertaining, which is why I'm somewhat looking forward to this fight, because this is the problem. If you have someone like De Los Santos, if he's not throwing anything, Stevenson won't throw anything. But if someone is actually throwing at Stevenson, Stevenson will throw back. So I actually think, tentatively, we might see a relatively good fight. Don't get it twisted. I do believe Stevenson is going to be hitting and hopping it and doing what he does. But I think he's going to be forced to be a bit more high volume than we've seen, and actually to throw some punches, and to throw some punches in anger. So because of that, I think we are actually potentially going to get quite a good fight here. I'm not saying it's going to be the Thriller in Manila or anything like that, but I think there is potential here for us to see a relatively entertaining fight, because I think Zepeda will force that out of Shakur Stevenson. So I think Stevenson will get the win. I think, although I did say earlier we shouldn't necessarily make it as a direct comparison between Stevenson and Farmer, there are similarities, that has to be said. I think the back foot nature of Farmer that we saw, Farmer does still employ a little bit of back foot tactics, and a little bit of slickness that you do see parallels with Shakur. And when he was doing that, you did see Zepeda struggle at times. So I do think in some ways the comparison is a little bit overplayed, because in terms of some of the success, like for example how he was able to drop Zepeda, that came by catching and shooting, which you do not see Shakur Stevenson do. But on the other hand, a lot of the success he had boxing on that back foot is something Shakur Stevenson does. So it's one of them ones. There is things to take and things to not take from that. So I do think Shakur Stevenson does outbox, does of course get a UD. I'm not saying he's not going to knock out Zepeda. If he knocks out Zepeda, I'll come here and I'll be speechless. I'm not saying that, Zepeda has an iron chin or anything, because I don't think he does. But I just don't expect that. I don't think Shakur Stevenson could knock the skin off a rice pudding, to be honest with you. So let's not be fair. He took, 7 or 8 rounds to knock out Josh Padley, who's an electrician who got the fight on about 5 days notice. So yeah, I don't think he's knocking out Zepeda, but I think we might get a relatively entertaining 12-round fight. And I think, as expected, I don't think this is a particularly big shock to anybody. I fully expect Shakur Stevenson to win on points. 12-round UD, something like that. Probably relatively wide as well. But what do you think? You let me know. Take it easy. Cheers. Thank you.